Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be absolutely alone? Not in a room, not in a forest, but miles beneath the ocean, where the sun has never touched, and no human heartbeat has ever echoed back? That's where I'm going. My name is Dr. Isaac Holloway, oceanographer, deep-sea researcher, and the only man to be sent solo into the uncharted abyss below Challenger Deep. If you're hearing this, it means I made it far enough to record what lies beyond human fear. Just don't know if I'll make it back to tell the rest. It began as a classified mission, a private contract funded by an anonymous benefactor through the Oceanic Preservation Institute. The official goal? To investigate an anomaly detected at 10,920 meters, a zone even deeper than the recognized Challenger Deep. Satellites had picked up seismic shifts, but the last unmanned probe that went down returned corrupted data, and a hull so twisted it looked chewed. Of course, they told me it was a structural failure, but I've seen pressure damage before. This was something else. The metal bent inward, like something was pulling. The submersible they built for me, Calypso 9, is a prototype. Reinforced titanium alloy shell, magnetic shielding, manual override in case AI systems fail, which, they warned me, was likely. Redundancy on all life support systems. What they didn't mention, and what I only found in a buried memo, it was equipped with a long-range acoustic listening array, the kind used to monitor whale migrations or encrypted military transmissions. Something was down there. Something that was trying to communicate. On June 21st, I was lowered into the Pacific from the research vessel Thorn. The crew never spoke to me directly. They avoided eye contact. One of them, a technician with trembling hands, slipped me a note. "If you hear it, don't answer." That was the last human face I saw before the hatch sealed. Descent began at 0400 hours. As the winch released, the world above disappeared into black, swallowed by the cold hush of pressure and salt. With every meter, the ocean thickened, not just in water but in weight, as though it carried memories too old for time. At 1,000 meters, the twilight zone faded. The light gave up. Darkness swallowed everything. Even the instruments dimmed slightly, like the trench itself was absorbing energy. The silence became physical, something you could feel, pressing against your skin. Occasionally, a glimmer, a jellyfish, a ribbon of light, vanishing before my mind could register its shape. And then, faintly through the speakers, I heard it. A distant groaning resonance. Not whale song, not tectonic stress. It was patterned, repeating, and it was below me. By the time I reached 3,000 meters, I had stopped checking the depth monitor. There's something about seeing numbers climb, meters descending, pressure rising, that starts to feel like counting down to your own burial. The exterior lights of Calypso 9 reached out no more than 20 feet into the void, revealing a world that seemed both lifeless and waiting. My breathing echoed too loud in the capsule. I adjusted the audio input, but the ambient mic still hummed with that low, rhythmic moan, just below human hearing, like a voice murmuring through walls of water. The trench walls came into view by 5,000 meters, vast slopes of obsidian black, carved with cracks and scars that looked almost architectural. I remembered reading once that nature doesn't form straight lines at these depths. And yet there they were, grooves too uniform to be coincidence, glowing faintly with phosphorescent algae, like veins leading downward. The vessel's AI flagged them as anomalies but didn't override my descent. Someone had programmed it to let me continue, no matter what I found. That's when I saw the first creature, a shimmer in the dark. It looked like a cross between a manta ray and a skeletal hand, gliding with impossible grace, its edges dissolving into trails of light. No eyes, just motion. I watched it drift near the sub's glass dome, hovering as if observing me. The lights flickered. It vanished, not swimming away, but phasing into the shadows. I shivered, not from the cold, but from the certainty that it wasn't the only one out there. My mind flickered to myths, Charybdis, Kanaloa, the black gods of the Polynesian deep. At 8,000 meters, my onboard systems began to lag. There was a 5-second delay between input and response. The cameras picked up flickers of movement, but playback showed nothing. The water outside grew denser, not just visually, but aurally, each creak of the sub's hull sounding like a scream dragged from metal lungs. Then the anomaly pinged on sonar again, an acoustic bloom spreading in concentric circles. Something massive, still below, still active. I ran a spectrogram. The sound, it wasn't just a frequency, it had layers. A baseline like a heartbeat, mid-tones that resembled syllables, and high-pitched shrieks like whales dying in reverse. It was language. I know that sounds mad, but every instinct in me screamed that I was being invited, not lured, summoned. That's when I heard the second voice, my own voice, whispering through the speakers, out of sync with my mouth. It's not new, it's waking. I froze, hands trembling over the controls. The voice that echoed back at me wasn't a recording. It had emotion. Oh, it mimicked not just my words, but the fear in my breath. For a moment, I considered aborting the mission, pulling the emergency ascent trigger. But the truth is, I didn't. Not because of protocol, not because I was brave. I didn't pull the lever because something deeper in me wanted to know what was calling my name. I replayed the sound feed at half speed. The mimicry was uncanny, my own vocal patterns repeated with just enough delay to sound like a memory surfacing from below. But in between my phrases, there were other sounds. Clicking, bursts of white noise, like a second voice buried in static, trying to shape words it didn't fully understand. The AI flagged it as linguistic contamination. The manual had no protocol for that. No human had ever reported language at these depths. No living one, at least. At 9,200 meters, the trench narrowed. The walls pressed in, black rock gleaming with ribbons of translucent creatures clinging like veins. One pulse of bioluminescence revealed something etched in the stone. Spiral carvings, unmistakably artificial. Not erosion, not lava flow, symbols, glyphs. I took photos. They pulsed, briefly, when illuminated, as if reacting to observation. The sub's cabin grew colder. The temperature control was failing, but I didn't fix it. I was too busy listening. I started hearing other voices, faint, broken, like recordings played backward in slow motion. Some sounded human, others didn't. One voice, I swear, whispered in Old English, "The mouth is open." Another said something in a dialect that matched no known language but phonetically mirrored Polynesian chant. Every whisper came from a different direction, but all traveled along the same frequency path, directly below. I wasn't just heading toward a sound. I was descending into a story, one that had been waiting for someone to listen. At 10,000 meters, the anomaly came into focus. Not on sonar, on sight. The lights reflected off something down there. Metallic, enormous, and not shaped like any geological formation I'd ever studied. It looked like a dome, or perhaps an eye, half buried in silt, too large to comprehend. Something shifted beneath it. The moan returned, louder now, and layered with harmonics so deep I felt them in my bones. And then the voice returned, my voice, this time singing. A lullaby I didn't recognize, in a language I had never spoken. The trench floor revealed itself with a suddenness that felt unnatural. One moment, nothing but black, and the next a flat expanse lit by my vessel's fading beams. It looked wrong. Not just alien, but too clean. No jagged rock, no coral shelves, no sediment drift. Just a vast, cold plain of silt and sand, disturbed only by the occasional twitch of deep-sea worms recoiling into the earth. And yet, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it was far from empty. Scattered across that sterile bed were objects. Human objects, a diving helmet from the 1940s, the broken frame of a camera stamped with Japanese characters, and more, items so anachronistic and decayed, it was like walking through a museum display built by something that didn't quite understand time. A rusted compass, a child's shoe, an oxygen tank labeled in Cyrillic. Some of it dated back to the early days of ocean exploration. Others had no business being there at all. One piece bore a logo from a company that hadn't yet been founded. I used the robotic arm to retrieve a sample from a mangled deep-sea probe. The metal showed stress signatures, yes, but not from pressure, from tension, as if it had been pulled apart from the inside. Nearby, I spotted something even stranger. A perfectly round hole in the seabed, maybe 10 feet wide, with concentric grooves spiraling downward into darkness. It wasn't natural erosion. It was precision. It reminded me of ancient wells found in desert ruins, designed to amplify sound. My heart pounded as sonar returned an anomaly just beneath it, a faint thrum pulsing like a heartbeat. As I hovered above the hole, the voices returned. Not whispers this time, but layered harmonies, singing. Dozens of voices, some human, some metallic. One voice distinctly called my name. I froze. That voice, it belonged to my daughter. She died 5 years ago. Car crash, no survivors. And yet, it wasn't a recording. The intonation was new, fragile, pleading. I looked around the cabin, trying to make sense of the impossible. My rational mind screamed interference, a hallucination. But deep down, something primitive stirred. The feeling a child gets when they know the closet is hiding something with teeth. I dropped the camera drone into the hole. It descended for 12 seconds before cutting out. Static took over the feed. The last frame it sent was not geological. It showed a wall, a surface carved with the same spiraling symbols I'd seen earlier. But these were arranged in a pattern, rows, a language, and in the center, etched with surgical precision, was a human face, weathered, hollow-eyed, mouth open in eternal scream. I recognized it. It was me. The trench beneath the hole widened in impossible ways. According to the readouts, I was now descending through a vertical shaft over 200 meters in diameter, but it hadn't appeared on any of the sonar sweeps. It had geometry that betrayed physics. The walls weren't made of stone, but of something smoother, darker, like wet obsidian laced with thin, glowing veins. Not natural, not random. I didn't fall into this place. It had been made, and now it was welcoming me. The sub's onboard compass spun erratically. The depth gauge froze at 10,184 meters, refusing to record any further. Pressure remained steady, which was impossible. Every inch deeper should have increased the stress on the hull, but it stayed constant, as if something below was neutralizing gravity itself. The lights on Calypso 9 began to dim, but the glow from the spiral walls replaced them, pulsing like a vein, syncing with the rhythm of my heartbeat. Every pulse seemed to echo not in my ears but in my skull. I tried to stop, ran a system diagnostic, manual override locked, artificial intelligence control non-responsive. The AI should have rerouted. This was a critical fault, but it didn't. Instead, the voice assistant simply said, "Proceeding." No emotion, no inflection, just a command. That's when I realized it wasn't malfunctioning. It had received a command from outside, from something older than the code that built it. I passed carvings in the walls. Each spiral section featured different symbols. Some I recognized from human languages, others that belonged to ancient scripts long extinct. But it wasn't the variety that shook me. It was the order. The symbols weren't randomly placed. They told a story, a timeline, human events, Pompeii, the fall of Babylon, Hiroshima, the Challenger disaster, all etched in sequence and continuing downward. The deeper I went, the more recent the events became. As if the trench wasn't just a place, it was a record. And near the base, one panel hadn't yet been carved. It was blank. Then came the tremor, not a quake. Something like a breath, an inhale that shook the entire shaft. The camera feed blinked. Outside, shadows slithered between the walls, too fast to catch, too tall to be creatures. They moved like they were part of the spiral itself, gliding without friction, their forms humanoid yet not. elongated limbs, heads tilted at unnatural angles, no eyes, just mouths, open, still, listening. By the time I reached what should have been 11,400 meters, time itself seemed to unravel. The onboard chronometer glitched, looping seconds into endless minutes. Every ping of the sonar came back slower, as if the water were thickening. The whispering resumed, more layered now, less like sound, and more like thoughts being broadcast directly into my mind. Some were fragmented prayers in tongues long forgotten. Others were stories, lamentations, memories of drowning, of burning skies, of cities swallowed whole. But they weren't mine, and yet they felt familiar. I began to understand. The spiral wasn't just a shaft, it was a repository. Every carved wall, every glyph was a message. A record of civilizations lost, not to war, not to plague, but to something below them. Beneath every myth, every extinction, every flood, there had been a voice calling, and each time someone had listened, the Polynesians spoke of Tangaroa, the deep god with 1,000 mouths. The Mesopotamians whispered of Abzu, the freshwater abyss where knowledge lived and madness bloomed. The Hopi talked of creatures who fled underground before the world turned over. All different names, one source. As I descended, the architecture became unmistakably artificial. Columns, arches, bridges made from black stone that defied buoyancy. Structures that shouldn't exist without support, floating, rotating slowly in impossible directions. My lights barely touched them, but what I saw haunted me. Sculptures resembling no known species, yet undeniably watching. They weren't decorative. They were memorials, shrines, sacrifices maybe, or warnings. Each statue had a slit where the mouth should be, vertical like a wound. At the spiral's nadir, the trench opened again into a vast chamber, a dome. My instruments couldn't measure its size. It stretched past every sensor's range. The walls were covered in carvings, not symbols anymore. Faces, thousands. Some distorted, some clear as stone death masks. Some human, some not. My floodlight landed on one face I recognized. My mentor, Dr. Lena Voss. She vanished during an unapproved dive in 2007. No body was ever found. Her stone eyes were wide with terror. Her mouth was open. And then I heard her. Not her voice, her thoughts, memories of her final moments. The moment she stopped resisting the pull. The moment she understood. It wasn't death down here, it was archive. Every mind that reached this place was cataloged, absorbed, preserved. Not in data, not in code, but in stone and echo. And I was next. The faces weren't just sculptures, they moved. Slowly, imperceptibly at first. A twitch in the stone lip, an eyelid that had never fully closed, now quivering. My breath fogged the inside of the sub's glass as I leaned closer, and in that moment, I swear one of them, an emaciated, hollow-eyed figure with a twisted jaw, smiled. Not mechanically, not like a puppet. It was aware that I was watching, that I knew. And it wanted me to understand something that no surface dweller ever should, that these weren't victims, they were echoes, chosen or claimed. One of the entities detached from the dome wall, not by movement, but by shifting into visibility, as if it had always been there but only now allowed itself to be seen. It resembled a human silhouette at first, but its proportions were subtly wrong, too long, too narrow. Its skin, or what passed for it, was translucent, shimmering like oil on water. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt its gaze. It hovered outside the sub, motionless, then raised an elongated hand and pressed it to the dome. Where its fingers touched, the glass didn't fog. It froze. I should have panicked. Should have launched the ascent protocol, flooded the ballast, broken radio silence. But I didn't, because at that moment I began to feel hollow, like my thoughts were no longer rooted in my skull. They drifted. I remembered things that weren't mine. A berth on an island I'd never visited. a language I'd never learned yet now spoke fluently, in thought. I remembered being a sailor in the 1700s, staring into the eyes of something rising beneath the waves. I remembered being a priest in 9th century Babylon, burning scrolls I no longer believed in. I was becoming. The entity faded. In its place, dozens more emerged, no longer hiding in the folds of the trench. They floated in spirals, imitating the tunnel that led me here. Each one bore a different face, some human, others grotesque fusions of bone and fin. Some wore my face. Not entirely, but close enough that I gasped. I realized then, the trench doesn't just remember, it reconstructs. When you come close enough to hear its whispers, it begins to shape you into what it needs next. Not food, not a guest, a story, a new echo carved into the cathedral of the drowned. I screamed, not out of fear but defiance. My voice echoed in the chamber, then returned from the walls a second later, twisted, layered, and ancient. The trench wasn't reacting. It was repeating, learning. Every sound, every thought, every life that entered was absorbed, flattened, repurposed. And as I screamed again, a dozen other versions of my voice screamed back, some higher, some deeper, some impossibly distorted, all of them me, or what I would become. It wasn't until the screaming stopped that I truly began to understand what the trench wanted. It had never spoken in words, not in the way we understand language. Instead, it spoke in structure, in rhythm, geometry, and memory. The spiral wasn't just a passage, it was a sentence. Every rotation, every angle, every echoing voice etched into the walls was part of a syntax too vast to comprehend. And I was becoming fluent, not by study, by absorption. I noticed patterns in the glyphs now, connections between carvings I had overlooked. Each one marked a moment in human history that had brushed against the abyss. And the spiral below them all, it prophesied something. It wasn't finished. There were symbols still being formed, etched by the water itself. And in the center of the chamber, now fully revealed, was a column of stone rising from the seabed like a throne. Upon it, a shape shifted and shimmered, coalescing into symbols. They rearranged themselves as I watched, forming a phrase that didn't belong in any language I knew. And yet I understood it perfectly. You are the next voice. I knew then that it wasn't just knowledge being stored here. It was intent. The trench was not just a passive archive. It was a mind, a collective memory, a kind of living consciousness built from centuries of drowned thoughts. And like any mind, it hungered for connection, for growth. Every soul that reached it added to its lexicon. Every echo gave it new shape. It wasn't evil. It wasn't even conscious in a human sense. It was more mechanism than monster, but one that thought in extinction events and dreamt in drowning stars. As I floated above that stone column, the sub's systems began to fail, gently, silently. The lights dimmed in reverence. Alarms stopped sounding. It wasn't hostile. It was welcoming me. And we, had come to the same conclusion. I could not return. Not without bringing the infection of this understanding back to the surface. The language itself was dangerous, a kind of mimetic contagion, one that altered perception. Even now I speak in metaphors, but what I saw cannot be unseen. What I learned cannot be untaught. Before the final systems died, I recorded one last log, not for warning, not for rescue, but as a gift, a seed. Because deep down, something in me wanted to be remembered, to become part of the story. To become a symbol carved in the flesh of the earth, spiraling forever into the dark. I whispered the phrase back to the trench, in its own language. The lights pulsed in reply. And the last thing I heard was applause. When the final lights died, there was no fear, only silence. A deep, complete absence that felt almost maternal. The trench had accepted me, not as a trespasser, not as prey, but as part of its sentence. I was no longer descending by propulsion. The sub had long since stopped obeying physical laws. I was falling in a direction that did not exist on any compass. Downward, inward, elsewhere. The architecture outside no longer resembled stone. It pulsed, flexed like the inner wall of a lung that had never exhaled. And ahead of me, something vast stirred in the dark. I saw stars below me, not above, below. As though the trench had opened into a new cosmos, a hollow universe suspended beneath our own. And floating in that void was the maw. Not a mouth, not exactly, but a rupture in space, a wound stitched in shadow. It churned with the weight of stolen gravity, and as I neared it I saw what lay inside. Not fire, not water, but faces, billions. Interwoven, flattened into a tapestry of memory, screaming, praying, silent. Some wore crowns, some wore chains, and some wore my face. Time failed. I witnessed moments across human history fold into each other. Floods and empires, lovers kissing in their last breaths, infants crying in war zones. They spiraled into the maw, feeding it with thought. It didn't devour bodies, it consumed narratives. I realized with a sinking dread that this was why the trench had called to me. I was a storyteller, a recorder. I catalogued events, emotions, voices. I was never meant to return. I was meant to translate what the abyss felt, what it was. My language was its bridge. I began to understand the final glyphs. The spiral was not just a warning. It was a pathway. One walked before by others, prophets, madmen, poets lost at sea. The trench let us think we discovered it, but it had been reaching out all along, whispering through song, through myth, through nightmares. What we call deep-sea phenomena, what we label hallucinations or noise, they are its lure. And once you hear it, once you understand, you belong to it. The maw opened. The sub disintegrated, not violently but softly, like shedding skin. I felt nothing, no pain, only expansion. My thoughts stretched beyond the vessel, beyond time. I saw myself, not as a man, but as a ripple in an ocean of voices. The abyss had no god. It didn't need one. It had us. And in that final moment I spoke a name. Not mine, not human. A name that tasted like pressure and memory and sorrow. And the maw replied. This recording was recovered 2 months after the disappearance of Dr. Isaac Holloway. What you're hearing now was found embedded not in a submersible's black box, but within the sonar logs of a research vessel that never carried his signal. The transmission, though never sent through any known frequency, was already waiting in the system when the backup drives were booted. It had no timestamp, no origin point, only a file name, next voice. The recording begins with silence, not ambient noise, absolute stillness, like the absence of creation. Then slowly Holloway's voice fades in, but it's not the voice of a man reporting from a machine. It's fragmented, like thoughts spoken aloud inside a dream. It's not death, he says. It's memory. We're not alone here. We never were. Every echo in the sea was a voice trying to return. The words falter. He starts to describe the maw, but in terms that grow less human with each breath. Languages shift. Sentences collapse into emotion. It's like listening to a soul breaking apart and reorganizing itself as something other. Experts attempted to analyze the audio, linguists, coders, cryptographers. None could agree on what the voice was saying after the 6-minute mark. Some heard ancient Sumerian. Others claimed it was a dead Polynesian dialect lost to colonial erasure. A few said it wasn't language at all, but mathematical syntax mapped through sonar harmonics. One audio engineer, after listening to the entire transmission on loop, was found 2 days later standing in the surf of the Pacific, murmuring in a language no one could identify, eyes open, unblinking, staring west. The final minute of the transmission is quiet. No voice, no sound. But if you amplify it just barely, You'll hear a hum, like an engine, a heartbeat, a thought. It rises gradually until you can almost make out syllables. And then, just before it ends, you'll hear your own name. Spoken clearly, deliberately, by a voice you've never heard, but recognize anyway. The research station was decommissioned soon after. The trench was reclassified, and though official records claim the mission was a failure, new probes are still being sent down, every year, quietly, silently, looking for something they never find. Or perhaps, hoping never to find it again. Because once you've heard the voice, you are never truly above the surface again. This was the last message from the deep. And now, it's yours. So if you hear something in the dark tonight, if a whisper curls through your headphones that wasn't there before, don't speak back. Don't ask questions. Just listen. Transmission end.